Hey YouTube, I want to begin this talk, this very long talk that will be begun by some and finished by none, but I want to establish a level of discourse here with Gurdjieffians about the Gurdjieffian thing. Be doing a lot of things on Beelzebub's tales to his grandson in Lucifer formatted videos. It's going to be very controversial for this crowd if they're watching, okay? And over the years, they will take a peek. So, here it is. Here's the one central question I want all detractors of the Lucifer series, and even people who like us, everybody, to consider when it's about knowledge. It was a question left on my profile page recently, and it reads thus: how much do any of us actually know? And the person capitalized know, okay? How much do any of us actually know? And I replied to this on his profile, and I said, okay, there's knowing about, and then there's knowing. Knowing about is quantifiable, demonstrable, and so it's subject to verification according to one likely set of criteria or another, evidence and statistical probability. Some would argue even the hardest evidence is ultimately simply a very sweeping statistical probability. Knowing is another matter, that is no matter at all, whose only quantifiable answer is in reply to a single question. Are you still suffering? I suppose there will be some Gurdjieffians who will argue that it's not about the cessation of suffering. That the old man went on about intentional suffering. I've mentioned that before in other videos, or at least one other video. And as far as I'm concerned, the old man's thing about intentional suffering gets back to the old American adage of no pain, no gain. You're going to build up your body or exercise. You're going to, there's going to be some stress, physical stress to that. And it's the same thing as building yourself up to be truly transcendent over suffering. Means, you're going to experience some stress in building yourself up. That's all. That's all he was getting at. A lot of this just gets into some clumsy confusion about terms and how things are put. I did a video very recently, Hinduism and Buddhism, and the Buddha reduced his native religion down to that one question, basically, the problem of suffering. And that's what the Lucifer series does. It is the practical approach. It is the pragmatic approach. Pragmatism is the devil in philosophical circles. Even moral pragmatism is the devil. It was denounced by a thinker I mentioned in my other video, Hinduism and Buddhism, Bertrand Russell. I wasn't quoting Russell because I'm a Russellite. It's just that he had an intelligent essay on why he wasn't a Christian. And so I thought I would cite it. But I could take Bertrand Russell to task. But maybe I will someday. Mostly the person's arguments were authoritarian, the same as talking to a Baptist or a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon or a Muslim. Your point of authority is what is written. No, what is written in here is begging to be seen through and beyond. It's all an allegory. What is written. Where does all the dogma come from with Gurdjieffians, the really doctrinaire ones? It comes from Ouspensky, P.D. Ouspensky. So in talking about the Kundalini video in G, the topic of Ouspensky becomes inescapable. And so, I've always held back about Ouspensky. I've always been very polite about Ouspensky. And I'm not feeling so polite toward Ouspensky just now. Number one, many great thinkers are known only really basically through some interpreter of theirs. So we're always getting it secondhand. This was true of Socrates. We only get Socrates through what his student Plato had to say about him. And it's true of Yeshua, called Jesus. Basically, everybody interprets what Yeshua was about according to the epistles from St. Paul. Okay, people can't even agree on what St. Paul meant, but a lot of what people who are buttonholing you about Christianity are about well, God said this and God said that, or the Bible said this, the Bible says that. The infallible word of God is St. Paul's interpretation of Yeshua. St. Paul was actually more in touch with certain energies than some people might think from his epistles. But he became intoxicated with the mass movement he was creating. And back then you say some things to the few, the inner circle, and you say all this to the multitude, the outer circle. And he got lost in the outer circle and so swept up by it in his belief that the world was about to end, and you have to have more, the more people you save, the better, So a lot of the inner teachings got lost. And Yeshua has to be understood, certainly has to be understood in terms of the Kabbalah, what's hidden. Why is all this stuff hidden? Well, it was undercover, the 2,000 years ago, the Orthodox Jews wouldn't have accepted a lot of the influences that went into Kabbalah. They would have said it was a disguised paganism, which it most certainly was. Okay, it was trying to make pagan mysteries made over into something that could be acceptable to those of Judaic belief. All right, and it all circled back on the general pagan population and became, so much got lost. It just got so lost. It's ridiculous. It's devastating. So when you get these personalities through some other vehicle, from a dominant personality that comes to represent them, a lot can get lost, and a lot of that is true of Ouspensky being the primary representative of Gurdjieff. There are other people who wrote about Gurdjieff. There are other avenues of approach before you take up Gurdjieff's own very difficult writing, and try to tackle that on your own or in a group. Okay. Ouspensky, for me, the only thing you can say about him is that Gurdjieff allowed that he quoted him accurately. They are accurate quotations of G. What Ouspensky makes of them has to be understood in light of the fact that everything said about him and everything he is said to have said to close friends points to the fact that for Ouspensky, almost all of this was just head knowledge. He never really got it. As far as I'm concerned, P.D. Ouspensky didn't have the foundation that any sincere, spiritual-oriented acid head has in this day and age. Yes, you heard me right. P.D. Ouspensky didn't have the foundation that any spiritually oriented acid head would have. Okay? I mean that. Okay? And that's not really putting down acid. I don't believe Ouspensky knew what any hippie knows about consciousness, any intelligent hippie. And I mean that completely. All right. He left Gurdjieff because he just wasn't getting it past a certain point. He didn't understand his teacher anymore. From what I've read, there was pressure for him to leave. And Gurdjieff got crueler and crueler toward him, because that's what he did when he was nudging people out the nest. He would nudge them and then he would kick them out. I don't know all the details, and you hear different stories. But Ouspensky, by his own admission, didn't understand his teacher past a certain point. And it's because he just couldn't get out of his head enough to do it. All right? And as far as, self-remembering, any post-1960s person who meditates gets self-remembering. It isn't. It isn't something you spend years learning how to do. You just go out and do it. It's a matter of that do you do it often enough for it to do you any good? All right? Self-remembering is just one approach to nowing. I talk about nowing in Beelzebub's Techniques 1. Okay? I've never discussed self-observation because that can get so weird. And people tend to want to live there. Oraj indulged in self-observation too much. All right? Now, the third component of that is supposed to be non-expression of negative emotions. I'm not for non-expression of anything. I will only say that when you're self-remembering and you're nowing and you're there, negative emotions, what we call negative emotions, like anxiety, wouldn't exist. It doesn't exist in that state. So much of what you're talking about with negative emotions is energy being blocked by a lot of mental aggregates of judgments in a constricted way of looking at things. So it's just a non-issue. All right? But certainly, dire situations are going to come up, fight or flight, in the midst of nowing, like they would with any animal. And you're going to have an emotional response to it. And you can't judge their response as, this rush of adrenaline to take care of business is, that's wrong. I won't express that, No, you have it. It passes through you. You experience it here and now. The Buddha said, just experience whatever you're experiencing here and now. The Buddha also said to show restraint when you couldn't really genuinely not have negative emotions, hold back. All right? And to be able to have the aptitude for that and the ability to do that, even if it means holding things in and being all knotted up inside, not showing it, and being real stoic with the whole thing, being really reserved, which is, everyone knows that Buddhism has that outward composure, even when it isn't real. You'll see Asians trying to maintain the pose. And that's appropriate sometimes, maybe not to that extreme, but there's all sorts of situations. You're around little kids, you don't want to bring them down with your mood. You're in a public place, and if it was you, you wouldn't want the guy next to you emoting all over the place, because, no one does. So it's that principle of honor of, if it was me, would I want someone acting like this around me? And no, not really. So there's a time and place. But the idea of at all times and in all places to never express negative emotion is ludicrous. You express negative emotions even if it's just screaming into your pillow. You let it out, you let it go. Okay. You don't hold it in indefinitely. All right. In my experience with nowing, you can be having 1 minute. You can be in absolute emotional hell, especially if you've broken up with somebody, a lover, and you're having a hard time of it. And then you can. It's like you're experiencing that same emotion. And that same set of, that you're going to the source of that anxiety and that weirdness and experiencing it at its source is its own release. It's much better, much better to reach that point with it. Okay, even if it is a cycle rather than, I've arrived and now I'm all better, I'm over this person. It's much better to come to those cycles by experiencing the emotion, even if it shows, okay, than to be holding it in. Okay, and I cannot help but feel that for people who have emotional intelligence, that they adapt to the kinds of principles going on with the Gurdjieffian crowd in terms of their own actual experience of those principles, rather than to be lectured to from someone who's just reading a book and for whom the idea of it really is just sitting on their feelings. I have a dear friend who's been in a lot of Gurdjieffian groups, and a lot of Gurdjieffians just think they have to come across as Mr. Spock. they're not showing any emotions, good or bad, negative or positive. It comes from the fact that you're coming from just a book knowledge about something, and in a very nerdy way, the ego is trying to adapt to it and strike up that pose. And it is a lie. You're living a lie. It's not right. Okay? All right? And he openly told friends just how depressed he could get, that they were having experiences that were outside his own reach. This is P.D. Ouspensky. So, Ouspensky type people, you do your thing with this book, I'll do my thing. And if you got a case to make against the case I'm making, let's hear it. You know, I've been on YouTube for 2.5 years. You know, the people who've attempted to debate me can only debate me from one mindset, one frame of reference, and one only, whether it's Christians or any other kind of persuasion. And so far, Gurdjieffians are of the same mentality, and that is the authoritarian spiritual mentality. Okay? The point of authority says this, and so that's what's true. Okay? And now this genius comes along and writes this insane book that the surface is so ridiculous that it cannot be taken seriously. And he says of this book, the bone is buried deep. Well, let's examine how are you digging for that bone, Ouspensky type guy? How are you digging for it? You know, reading the book 3 times, sometimes out loud, sometimes in a group. Well, what's hidden? What have you found that's hidden in the book? You know, every unknown word he explains as he goes, or almost all of them as he goes. What's hidden so deep? You know, where's this bone buried so deep? Huh? Where is it? If you find it,